I've received requests in regard to spring high school sports. Spring high school sports in regard to who has to be quarantined. The good news is spring sports are basically outside, and that makes things better. And we're also seeing better numbers, as we just talked about. So we're announcing today that students are not required to quarantine because they've had an incidental exposure to COVID in a classroom. Those kids who we've said for the last few months, if they're in a classroom, everybody's wearing a mask, they're exposed, they do not have to quarantine from school. But the order was that they would have to quarantine from extracurricular activities, from sports and other things. What we're saying today is no longer will they have to quarantine from those sports as well, from those sports or those extracurricular activities. So, Dr. Vanderhoff, you want to kind of give us a quick background on the rationale for this decision? I think it's very good news for anybody who's got kids in sports, spring sports, and we're moving forward. Doctor.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Governor. As you noted, our K through 12 student athletes have two very important factors working in their favor as we head into the spring. First, most of the time, they're outdoors or in facilities that can open doors or windows to allow enhanced ventilation. That really reduces the risk of COVID transmission. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, our K through 12 students have an outstanding track record of wearing masks and following safe practices in the classroom. The benefit of these measures in our classrooms, as everyone I think will recall, was clearly demonstrated by the Ohio schools COVID evaluation, which we completed towards the end of December at the height of our largest surge. And that was affirmed by another study from Mississippi published in December, on December 18th by the CDC. So this allows us to be confident that a student who is currently not required to quarantine for a school-based exposure is at very low risk and can continue to participate in organized sports activities as long as they remain symptom-free and follow all the applicable sports guidance. Now, there are also times when our student athletes might have an exposure outside the classroom that requires them to quarantine. In considering that quarantine, we and the CDC recognize that a quarantine period shorter than the traditional 14 days may actually improve compliance by making it easier for people to complete. The new guidance today will also allow our K-12 student athletes who have some other exposure, again, likely outside the classroom, to end their quarantine after day 10 without testing or after day 7 following a negative test collected on day 5 or later. This, of course, now provides our student athletes access to the same 10 and 7-day quarantine options that we announced some time ago for most other Ohioans. And as you said, Governor, this is, of course, very good news for our student athletes. But there's steps we can take because our students are doing such a good job with masking, distancing, and other safe practices. And because so many of our teachers, coaches, parents, and other adults are similarly adhering to safe practices and lining up to get vaccines.